Hello and welcome. Perhaps you're someone who's been weaving for a while, or maybe someone who's new to weaving, and you've accumulated some yarn. Maybe you purchased some yarn because the colors were just so pretty, or maybe you purchased yarn because it was a really good deal. You just couldn't resist. Well, that's what happened to me. About a year ago, I purchased the yarn in front of me. I had no idea what I was going to do with it, but I knew that one day I would come up with something. Today's the day. I'd like you to join me on my journey as I take this yarn and I weave something with it. Here's the yarn again. It is actually 6.5 2 cotton. The color ones are, and the one in the center, the dark brown, is actually 8-2. But I'm going to blend all these together. I'm not going to talk about how I decide on color. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the mathematics and a little bit of designing on how I like to do some stripes and things like that. We're going to use the iWeaveIt program. I'll explain a little bit about that, and then I will also use a form that talks about calculating your warp and weft. All right, we know we have some yarn. These are my big cones of yarn. This is one of them. I said it was 6.2. Well, in actuality, it's 6.5. Sometimes when you buy yarn, you're lucky enough to go to the vendor, and here's the page from the vendor. It's 6.5 2-ply cotton. You see what the deal was, $10 a pound. And guess what? If you are watching this and you can still access some, go for it. She also explains it's open-ended. She tells about one of the colors. And then most cones weigh approximately 3.5 pounds. And she goes through all of that. And then what's really great is she says that the yarn per pound is approximately 2,730 yards per pound. It's a little larger than 8.2 is what she says. And she actually gives you a suggestion for weaving for your set. I decided, I know she has 16 EPI here. I decided that I'm going to do 18 EPI because then I can do a plain weave or a twill. So that's one of the nice things when you purchase yarn. Now, if you don't have that access, you might have to use some kind of a chart like this. I'm going to put this one right on top of that. Now, the charts will give you some information, and I slide this over just a little bit. Well, maybe I don't need to. I could look at 8.2 and 5.2, and I know that the 6 is halfway in between. So I would possibly pick a number there that's yards per pound. Plain weave, again, it says here 16 to 20 or 15 to 18. And then for twill, they give some suggestions. So if you're not sure what the set is, if the buyer or the company that's selling it doesn't give you that option or that suggestion, you might have to look at charts. There's lots of charts out there. Basically, you just look for a yarn set for weaving or a table or something like that. So that's one thing to do. But like I said, lucky for me, this particular vendor already gave you that information. Now what I'm going to do next is we're going to go to what I use for calculating. It's called iWeaveIt. Now here's my design that I've already started doing. So I'm not going to start from scratch. But you can see here, if I zero in a little bit, those are representing the 4 colors and then the dark brown. Now, I like to work with easy numbers. I don't want to make life too complicated for myself, and I also like things that look nice. In this case, I said 18 ends per inch. So what I've done is I have decided that 16 are a color and 2 are going to be the dark brown. Right away, I have an inch. I like to think in inches when I'm doing some designing. I could also think in half inches as well. In this situation, taking that cotton, I've decided that I'm going to make either probably some small towels, or maybe they may end up being some nice larger placemats. But it's a nice weight for either one. Now, what am I going to do with all of this? How do I decide what what to do? Well, there's some recommendations for towels and placemats. Some of them are maybe end up being 16 inches wide, some 18, some 20. Placemats could be 12 or 13 or maybe even 11. So I've done a lot of practice with that. So those are some numbers that I've already had figured out, and I kind of know what this yarn's going to do. So I've already decided that I'm going to do this at 16 inches in the loom. Now this over here has a nice little calculating. So if I hit this button up here, it has the project set up. So I've plugged in 18 set. Now the picks per inch, sometimes that's hard. That's how many back and forth. Well, often it's maybe even less than 16. If your set is 18, it's rare that your weft is going to go back and forth 16 and 18 inches as well. It's usually a little less. Then I added some loom waste. I decided 15% shrinkage. Now the width in the loom is 16.2. That's to add the little dark brown that I decided to add on each end. Then I decided that this is going to be a 6-yard warp. Now I then go down to the calculate set. I don't fill it in, just not something I want to do because they make recommendations, but I've already decided using the chart or the suggestion that the vendor did. Now if I go to calculations, it's already done a lot of calculating for me. I'm not going to go through the whole how the WeaveIt program works. It's pretty intuitive. But basically I've decided that it's going to be 4 shafts. They've already calculated my design, and I'll show you that in a minute. And the other nice thing is it already told me how many yards I need of each color for the warp and the weft. It's telling me that in the loom it was 6 yards, but a little bit wider because of the 2 dark ones. And then they say the finished length is going to be only about a little bit over 4.5 yards, and the width is going to be maybe 14. So I'm going to go from a warp that's 16 inches in the loom width down to a little less than 14, and the 6 yards it's going to go down to less than 5 according to the calculations here. The other nice thing about this, it also gives me my table. It tells me how many ends of the dark brown and then the kind of the peach color, the blue, the orange color, and the green. And it even gives me the heddle count. Now you may be wondering why it says 49 and then it says left and right half. When you're warping a loom to try to balance your heddles and have half on one side and half on the other, this information is extremely helpful. So that's just a quick overview of how this WeaveIt program works. Now, how do I do the designing of the colors? Well, like I said earlier, I've decided I'm going to do 16 of the color and 2 of the dark brown. And what happens, I know it's going to get really small here, but what happens is I have a repeat. Now, this is where I'm doing math in my head, so stay with me. Each one of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, are 4 inches, and they're 18 ends per inch. Well, if I have 4 inches and those are each 18, what I'm going to do then is I want to make this 16 inches wide. Well, I just have to repeat this 4 times. 4 times 4, 4 inches times the 4 repeats. I have 16 inches in the loom. If I want to go to 20, I could. If I wanted to play around and maybe make one of these wider or add more on the end, that's kind of how I do a little bit of my designing on using this particular program. Now, what happens with this also, it's kind of hard to see, but there's a number up here. And as I go across, it keeps changing, and it literally goes all the way. I'm going to keep going. Sorry about the speed here. It's going to go to the very end where I end up with the green. We're getting there, almost there. Repeat, repeat, repeat. And there I am at the very end. Might be hard to see, but there's 292 total ends. If I go back to the calculations, it does tell me, where is that heddle count? There it says 292 ends. Now I had to play around a little bit with it, but again, this is one way to try to do a little bit of designing using a computer program. There are other programs out there too. Now the other thing that you can see here is that I played around with how I treadle the loom. Now on the side here, we can kind of zero in a little bit on it. These again are how you tie it up, or if you have levers on a loom that is a table loom and you push the levers down, you can push lever 1 and lever 3 and 2 and 4 and get what we call tabby. Well, I wanted to make like a little diamond pattern. So if you see here, I went all the way back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So I get this little kind of like a flowery pattern, and it's going to continue all the way across. If I wanted to play around and do some other designs and with patterns, you can also go back up here and change the tie-up. You can change your treadling. You can have a lot of fun with it. Again, that's one thing that I do. Now, one of the cautions is that the colors you put in here, it's kind of sometimes hard to match the color that you have in available, but you do the best you can. There's actually a little color wheel here where it says color setup. And this is where you get to play around, and if you watch this little right here, I'm not going to change anything. I can do all sorts of finding a color to try to match whatever it is that I want, and then you plug all of those in there. But I'm not changing anything right now. I want to keep it just as it is. Now I could also, so again, it gives you a little bit of an idea of what the end result might be in the loom.